welcome back. This is lesson 6 of the Dynamic WordPress course for beginners. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about queries and listings and how it connects with what we discussed in the previous lesson, where we talked about meta fields and meta boxes, having to add some information to the back end and be able to connect those to the front end so that the client or whoever can manage that in the back end, and it will show just as you fill the data in the front end. So in this lesson, let's talk about queries and listings. But first, we'll make a case for why we even need listings in the very first place. Let's come back down here to where we have, of course, the page is just as we left it. And down here, we have inside of here, we have projects. And if you recall in the previous lesson, in fact, we can come to the back end. You remember we created a CPT or a custom post type for projects, right? You remember that? Great. Now, if you open up projects right here, you can notice inside of here that we have just one project. Remember, we added just one, and that project was for Monter, but it's in no way connected to the front end. Now, this is very different from just creating meta fields, because we cannot just come into the back end of this homepage and then create meta fields for each of these projects. We can do that, but that will not be the smart way to do it, just to be clear. So what will be the smart way? We did it. We already created the project CPT or custom post type. And when we did create that, we added one project to it. We can add more projects depending on the number of projects the person has right here, right? So we have Monter right here. But if you recall, if we edit this Monter project right here, you remember when we created this, we did not add an image. And that image is what we have right here in the front end. We need to be able to manage all of this, all the projects in the back end, so that each project has its own individual page. And then what each of this block will be is what we'll call our listing. But we'll make it make sense in a bit. But first of all, let's come to the back end here and add an image for that particular project of Monter. Where are we going to do that? Remember, we have two different ways of doing this. The first way is that we can create a meta field for a media meta field type, where we can then add the image and then link that image to the front end here. However, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And what does that mean? WordPress has a default featured image functionality. We only need to add support for that. And to make you remember that, let's come back to the dashboard here, come inside of posts. Let's just edit the post, the CPT of posts. We can edit one of the post type of post, the hello world posts right here. And you can take note inside of here on the right that you have set featured image, meaning for the post type of posts, you can add a featured image. So why can we not do that inside of the post type of projects? That's simply because we did not add support for the featured image. So let's do that. We're going to come back inside of the project CPT, come to JetEngine and come inside of post types. We want to edit that post type and add support for the featured image functionality. We're going to come down here to advanced settings, and we'll scroll down until we find supports. And inside of here, we want to add support for thumbnail or featured image. Once we click on that, we see we now have support for that. And once you do that, you can click on update post type. And if you edit any of those projects right now, let's say we want to edit this one, we'll see we now have the ability to add a featured image. This is very, very, very nice. Now let's just take note of what featured image we have. This is a featured image we have for Monter. So let's link that here in the front end. So we're going to select that featured image, and down here, we're going to select set featured image. And once we do that, we see it's right there. We can click on save. And that's it for that. Of course, we can begin to add content inside of here, but we don't want to do that for now. Let's come back now to our list of projects, and inside of here, we can begin to add all the other projects. We have 3 more inside of here. We can select that, we can copy that, add a new project. Of course, I believe you should know how to do this by now. All you need to do is click on add new project. You need to select the name of the project right there, select featured image, select that image, which is this one right here, and select that, select featured image, click on publish, publish again, and now Neymar is live. if we try to view any of this project we're creating in the front end, we can just click on view project right here in the front end. And what we're viewing right now in the front end, as I explained in the previous lesson, is that project. You see the URL here shows the domain name of the site, and then projects, which is the slug given to the project CPT, and finally the name of the project you're currently viewing. So this is very nice. Let's close that out and continue to add our projects. Let's come back now to the next one, which is railway. We're going to copy that. We want to add a new project right here, and we want to put that inside of here as the title. We want to select the featured image. The railway project is this. We want to select that right here. Select featured image, click on publish. It's going to ask, do you want to really publish this? Of course. Click on publish. We want to come back again, add the final project here, which is, I don't know what I call this and why I called it that, but it really doesn't matter right now. We just want to add that project right there, and we want to give it the name of Samer or whatever I called it, and I want to paste that inside of there, select project or featured image, and that's it right here. Once I do that, select featured image, click on publish, we are done. We're done creating the list of all of the projects we have on our website. And this is very, very nice. Now, if we close that out and come back into the dashboard here, we have a list of all of the projects that we have on this website. Now, remember that we have skill, which is the taxonomy. And of course, that taxonomy is what we created to help us really categorize how each or where each project falls in terms of what skill was applied, right? And right here, we have web design. We also have web development right here. We can also add just one more here. Let's say brand design, something like that is all right. We're going to click on add category just so it's added here. And if we come back to the list of projects, we can refresh that just so we can begin associating each project to the number of skills, maybe a skill or a number of skills applied to that particular project. So let's say for Samer, let's do quick edit here. Let's say that one was web design. We click on update. We come to railway, we quick edit. Let's say it's for web development, we update. Come to Neymar, let's say that was brand design, we update. If we come to Monter, quick edit, that one was web design and web development, which we selected previously, and it's completely fine. We're going to click on cancel now, and we have everything set up the way we want it to. What is the next step? The next step is what we absolutely need to do before creating a listing of these project items in the front end right here, right? So in order to do that, we need to create a query. Now, before we create the query, let's talk about what a query actually is. Inside of WordPress, when you create a query, you're simply telling WordPress what to fetch from the database and how to fetch it. All right. So let's try to create a simple query right here by making use of a feature that is exclusive to JetEngine right here. It's called JetEngine Query Builder. Now, remember previously I mentioned the use of a plugin such as advanced custom fields that can help you to build custom post types, and you can also very easily make use of it to add meta fields. It doesn't have the capability of building queries like I'm about to show you with JetEngine Query Builder. This is exclusive to JetEngine Query Builder, and it is a feature that makes everyone want to make use of this. Now, let me just show you how easy it is to work with this, and in the future, you're going to understand how complex this can get, and the fact that you can use this to do unbelievable things. But let's start now with the very, very simple one. We're going to come inside of JetEngine here and come inside of Query Builder. We're going to open this. Let's just open this in the new tab. So we have Query Builder loading up for us. Now, inside of here, you have a list of all the queries that you've previously created, which is 0 at this time. So let's create our very first query. We're going to click on Add New right here, and we want to add our query. Now, what are we going to call this query? It's entirely our choice. In this case, I want to say query of all projects on the site. Something like that is all right. Whatever you want to call this is entirely your choice. Inside of here, you can give this query some description so that you know what you created the query for. And when it's time to make use of it in the future, you will not be lost. All right. So I want to leave my description as is. I wouldn't bother with that for now. I'm all right. The title, the name here is entirely descriptive. So I can come down here to where I have query type, and you see these number of query types right here. You have inside of here post query. which if you watch the previous lesson, you understand this spans across whatever number of post types you have on your website. It will not matter. Post here does not mean post as it is on your WordPress dashboard, but post types. So you can select from any number of post types, basically. Inside of here, you also have terms query, which is referring to, what do you think? You guessed it right, taxonomy terms. So you're going to be able to query terms. You can also query users, comments, and here you have SQL/AI query. This is where things start to get intermediate to advanced, because you can use technically AI to build out some complex query for you in case there are no, pre-built or usable UI for you to build out your queries. You can really dig in and make use of AI to build your queries, which is very nice. You also have repeater query right here. We talked about repeaters when we were discussing meta fields. So of course, this is what is going to query that kind of meta field. You have current WP query. We're going to talk about that in the future. And inside of here, you also have match query, which we're going to talk about in the future too. And finally, custom content type query, which is, if you recall, when we talked about CCTs or custom content types, this is the exact query you need to fetch that and show it in the front end. So right now, because of course we want to fetch or build a query for the project CPT, we know definitely that we're referring to our post query. So once we select that, that's completely fine. Now, under the custom query ID, we want to leave that as is. We're going to talk about that in the future. For now, let's just leave that as is. Inside of catch query, you want to leave this toggled on if you want your query, the entire query, to actually run faster. And what that means is that the first time the query runs, it kind of saves it in a way that when it runs the next time, it does it in a very faster way. So usually you want to keep catch query toggled on. Now, inside of catch expires, we want to leave that as is. We're going to talk about that sometime in the future. Let's just leave that as is. Also, the REST API endpoint, we want to leave that as is for now. Those are bordering on intermediate to advanced concept. We'll leave that as is for now. All right. What's really important to us is here inside of the post query settings, where we can select, really dial down what we need to query in the front end. In this case, we need to query our post type of what? Of project. So we're just going to simply type in project here and select the project CPT. We can also select what we want the post status to be. For example, if we want only published projects to be shown in the front end, we can select that right here, so that projects which are trashed or maybe drafts don't show up inside of this query. It makes sense, right? Great. Now that we have that, you have all these other settings right here. You also have inside of here meta query, tax query, date query, posts, query, comments, and all these other settings that can help you really dial things down. But we're not going to deal with all of those settings today because, of course, most of them are bordering on intermediate to advanced concepts. But for now, what is important is for us to be able to query all our projects. All right. So once we have that selected, we're going to come all the way up here. If we want to, we can toggle on preview results. And down here, if you scroll down, you're going to see on the right-hand side here is going to show you an overview of what number of items is going to return. As you can see here, you have a result count of 4. So what that is telling you is that you're going to have 4 items returned. And as you can see here, for each of those items, you have right here, you have an ID for the item. You have the post title. For example, you have Samir right here. You have the post status. You see it's published. You have the date it was published, which is right now while I'm recording this. We just did this together like a few minutes ago. It's right there inside of here. Now you have all of these details, which you shouldn't bother yourself with right now. Let's just toggle off preview results. That was just to show you that this query is actually working. And we didn't have to touch any line of code whatsoever to get that from the database. Now we can click on add query. And what is the next step? The next step is to make use of this query to build out our listing in the front end. Remember, we talked about how queries help you to determine where you want to get stuff from the database and how you want to get that. Now, what do listings do? Listings simply help you use queries to determine how things are displayed in the front end. So let's see very easily how to make use of that. If you come inside of here to listings, right here inside of listings stroke components. We can click on that. And what we want to build now is the simple listing of projects. Let's do that very quickly. We're going to come inside of here, click on add new item, and it's going to ask us what the listing source is. If we want to, we can select the listing source as posts. Inside of here, we want to select maybe the post type of projects right here. We're going to select projects and, just give this listing a name and go ahead to build out our listing. But we don't want to do that. And why? Because of the fact that we've already built a query that can help us to display this in the front end. So why don't we utilize that? This was an old way of doing it. Now this that I'm about to show you is a newer way. We can select Query Builder right here, and inside of Query, we can select here the query of all projects on the site, which is the query we just created for this purpose. So let's give this listing a name. Let's say this is a listing of projects. Something like that is all right. Once we create that, we can select the listing view. In this case, what that simply means is what we want to use to build out our listing. We have two options. We can either use the page builder, which we've been using before, whether it's Elementor or whether it's Bricks Builder, in case that's the page builder that you chose to go with, or you have the default WordPress builder, which is the blocks stroke Gutenberg, right? In our case, we're going to make use of Elementor because that's what we've been building with. Now, once we select that, we're going to click on Create Listing Item. And what will that do? That's very simply going to create an interface for us to now build a single instance of that listing. Now, that's essentially how listings work. You're essentially editing a single instance of that listing. So whatever you do inside of here will repeat multiple times on the page depending on the number of items in that particular query. Does it make sense? Let's see. Let's make it make sense. We're going to select now a very simple layout. Let's say it's a flexbox layout here. We're going to select the structure here. And inside of here, we're going to add two items. The first item we want to add here is a dynamic image. We're going to select dynamic and drag in the dynamic image widgets right here. These dynamic image widgets right here is going to help us to select dynamic images from the backend, whether it's inside of a meta field or whether it's a featured image, which is the post thumbnail, which we see right here as the source. Now, whatever it is, we can select that inside of here. For now, we know it's our post thumbnail, so we're very easily going to select that right here, and that is completely fine. We see right here, it fetches just one of the items for us. Now we can come inside of the listing item settings here, just so we can make this appear, something close to how it's going to look for us in the front end. We're going to come to listing settings right here and adjust the preview width so that it's a bit, smaller. Maybe something around this should be fine. It will not affect the layout in the front end. It will only help us to kind of like preview this single instance of that listing. We know we have this first. We also have inside of here the title. That's if we kind of edit that page in the front end. That is the home page right there. We just want to edit that, see how things are looking right here. We see that we have a list of the projects which we added manually on the page. We didn't add it dynamically, so we want to change that right now. Right here, we have all of the projects. We can see we have the heading inside of here. This heading was the heading 3 right here. We can see. We can come back inside of the listing and we can add a dynamic field widget right here at the top. Now, why a dynamic field widget? Because that very easily helps us to fetch something like a post title or something from the custom field that we created in the back end. Whatever it is, this can help us fetch that. So we see very easily, it just fetches the name of the project, which is the title. As you can see inside of object field here, we see title right here. And it just puts the title right there on the page. But we also need to come to the HTML tag and select H3. And once we select that, it of course increases the heading level for us, which will also increase the size of that heading widget. This looks visually okay for me. I don't know about you, but if you wanted to adjust this, you can very easily do that in terms of design, right? But so far, this is okay. We can click on publish. We could come now to the front end here where we have the projects, and we can very easily take off or delete all of these project instances. And why are we deleting them? Because of the fact that we have created a single query that will fetch all of our items for us, right? Now we can duplicate this container right here. We see inside of this projects, we have this container inside of here. We can duplicate that container. Let's just click on duplicate, and we have that container right here below. Inside of that container, we have a divider, so we're going to delete that. We're also going to remove that heading widget right there, because now all we need to add inside of that container is the listing of all of the items we've created. So let's do that. We're going to click on add new element right here and just search for the listing grid widget, which is also a provision of JetEngine. Once we drag that inside of here, it's going to ask us which listing do you want to show. I'm going to say inside of listing here that I want to show the listing of projects. So let's just search and select listing of projects. Now you see it just brings in all of the listing items inside of here for us. This is very, very wonderful. I'm absolutely loving what we're doing here so far. What do you think about it? Let me know in the comment section below. Now, this is dynamically fetching all of our project items for us. We can now very easily determine how we want the design to look. In this case, we see we have a number of columns, 3 columns. So in each line, we have 3 columns. We want to adjust that to 2 columns per line. And that just essentially returns everything that we've designed here back to how it was when we first started. So we have each of these items right here, very easily done for us. This is absolutely nice. Now we can do one more thing. We can absolutely allow each listing item to be clickable, so that when you click on a listing item, it takes you to the page where that particular project exists. So you can read more information about that single project, which is an additional incentive for making use of a CPT or a custom post type for this use case. So let's click on publish for now. We're going to come back inside of listings right here. We want to come inside of listing item settings by clicking on settings icon at the top here. And inside of listings, we want to say right here that we want to make this listing item clickable. So once we select that, we're going to select here inside of listing source, permalink. Remember, I talked about permalinks, which is simply the link to that particular post, right? Now, once we select that, we want to do one more thing. Inside of where we have ARIA label or link text, to be able to specify the link text, what is going to be the text for that particular link. So now we've made it clickable. In fact, if we click on publish right now and we come to the front end, let's just refresh this page in the front end just so we can see how things are looking so far. If we come here and hover over this, we see this is entirely clickable right here. If we hover, we see if we click on this one, for example, Samer, we go to the single page where we can see more details about Samer. Very nice, right? And this is working very beautifully. But let's come back here for now and see what more we can do. Because right now, the link to that page does not have any label in case, let's say, someone who is visually impaired tries to access this website. They should be able to have their assistive devices or their computers read out to them what clicking on this link will do for them. So let's come back inside of here to the listing. And we want to come inside of here to where we have ARIA label or link text, and we want to specify that a person clicking on this will be clicking on a link to this particular project. So we should not manually type inside of here, click here to view projects Samer. Of course, we can do that, but then all of the listing items will have the exact same thing. It's going to say click here to view project Samer, right? But instead of doing that, let's just copy out click here to view project. We want to copy that out for now. And I'll show you a smart way to do it so that it's dynamic too. We want to click on the dynamic tag icon inside of here. Once we click on that, we want to select current object field. And what that will do is that it knows, JetEngine knows that we're inside of the listing context and it wants to fetch the post title. For example, the post title in this case will be Samer, and that will be a dynamic post title, right? So we're going to select that inside of field here. We just want to select post title, and that will very easily fetch Samer. But if the link simply says Samer, then it isn't saying something valuable to a screen reader. So we want to say, click here to view project Samer. something like that. So in order to do that, we want to come inside of the advanced settings, still within the context of that dynamic tag. And inside of the before, we want to paste that right there. So it's going to say right here, we see here, it says, click here to view project. And then I'm going to add a space because the rest of it is going to be filled in by the dynamic value, right? Does it make sense? Great. I like that. You're following. I love that. Now we'll click out of this. We're going to click on publish. And if we come to the front end and we refresh this, really nothing changes right here. So if an assistive device like a screen reader comes to look at this page, it's going to say here, click here to view project summary, click here to view project railway, click here to view projects namer, and so on, right? Does it make sense? Great. Now let's do one last thing. We want to be able to create a listing for our blog post, and that will simply be a listing where we're going to add the post title right here. We're also going to add here an excerpt, which is just a simple small description or short description about that blog post, and a button which is going to link us to that particular blog post. You know how to do this, right? Let me know if you know how to do this so far. You can leave that in the comment section below. And by the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, you're enjoying the entire content of this lesson and the course, be sure to hit the like on this video because it's going to help this video to reach more and more people. And if you want to see more lessons in the future, be sure to subscribe by hitting the subscribe button below. Now, let's proceed to create a listing for this particular blog. It's very easy. We'll follow the same process which we did for the project. Let's just close out the project listing right here, close out projects, also close out this project CPT and this one. And so we're just going to declutter most of what we have right here. And we're going to come back to the dashboard here and come to JetEngine, click on Query Builder, create a new query. We're going to speed through this. Let's do this like we know what we're doing, right? Let's simply add a new query. In this query, we're going to call it query of blog. Something like that is all right. Once we select that, it's of course post query. That's fine. We're going to come down here to post type, select posts because that's what we need. Inside of post status, we're going to select published because we need only published posts. Once we're done, we click on add new query. We're done. Simple as that. Very quick. We're going to come down inside of listings and components right now and create a new listing. Using the listing source of Query Builder and the query of blogs, listing item name, what we're going to call that, we're just going to say listing of blogs. Something like that is all right. Once we're done, we click on create listing item. And inside of here, we begin to build out our listing as we want it to appear. If we want to speed up our job, we can just come down inside of here and copy one of these containers. Let's just copy this container right here. We're going to come inside of here and just right click and paste that entire container right there. Now we can come inside of the settings, the listing item settings, and inside of listing settings here, we want to adjust the preview width so that we look at this just how it's going to look in the front end. We can then begin to connect each of these items to what they should be in the front end because they're currently not dynamic. These are static values. And if we want to, we can use all of these widgets as they appear here. Instead of using the dynamic field widget, we can make use of this if we so desire. And how? By making use of the dynamic tag functionality. And let's very easily do that. Here, instead of my blog post title, we just simply want to select dynamic tags and say we want to fetch, instead of this, we want to fetch current object field and object field of what? We want to fetch the post title. So we're just going to select title right there. And voila, we have Hello World, which is the only post we have on our WordPress website. Let's come back to the dashboard now and view inside of all posts. Let's just take a look at it. We're going to see Hello World right here. Let's edit that post. We have just one, so we expect just one item inside of that listing. If we want to add an excerpt, we can very easily do that. Let's just copy what we have here, come to posts, come inside of add an excerpt and paste that excerpt right there. So whatever we want to add as a short description, we can put it right here. Let's say we're done with that. We click out of it, we click on save, and we can very easily come back now to the front end. We can select what should be the excerpt. We can just select that, come inside of dynamic tags, and right here, we want to select the current object field option again. And inside of field here, we want to select excerpt. Once we do that, it fetches the excerpt that we just created. Exactly. Welcome to WordPress. This is your first post. Edit or delete it, then start writing. Very, very nice. And finally, we have the button widget right here, which we're not going to use. I'm going to show you just why in a bit. What we're going to use instead is the dynamic link widget. So let's just take off the button widget we have right here, and we can enter inside of here dynamic link and drag in the dynamic link widget. And what you have here is permalink, which will give you the opportunity to make use of that link, which will just open up this post or whatever post it is that this link exists inside of. So it's kind of context aware, right? Do you understand? Makes sense. So now once we have this link inside of here, we know that we need it to look like a button. So let's just try to make it look like that. And to drive home the point, I'm going to give you a crash course right now about how to style a link to look like a button, but while making it absolutely responsive. Let's see how that works. Once you select that dynamic link widget right there, you want to come inside of style. Of course, after changing whatever settings you want to change there, like the text that's inside of the link and, stuff like that. Inside of here, we want to select background type and just select a background type like this. As you can see right here, I made use of a variable instead of setting a manual value right here. So this is good. And if ever I need to change the color in the future, I can do it all from one place. Inside of text color here, I want to do the same thing, select a global color and come here and select white. And now it's beginning to look like a button. What I need to do now is add a padding around that button. And here is where the crash course really exists. When you come down here inside of padding, what do you set as the unit for setting up what the padding is inside of this button? Well, the answer to that question may look simple because remember in the past we talked about not using pixels but using rem instead. And we talked about the fact that when you use rem, when a user increases or reduces what his value is in terms of his font size, that is going to scale up and down based on what you set as your rem value here. If you did your research, you did your homework, you will understand that this is the case. However, when you're setting up a button, you do not want to use rem. You instead want to use m. And I'm going to prove that to you right now. Let's say we want to select rem. And inside of here, we want to unlink this because why? We want to be able to set each of the side values individually. So let's do that. For the top, we're going to say 0.5. For the bottom, we're going to do the same, 0.5. On the left and the right, we're going to select 1 rem on both sides, right? So now on all sides, we have this nicely spaced, right? This is good. And this looks like the button we're aiming for. However, let's just temporarily duplicate this button right here. And what we have now is the same thing in 2 places, right? So we want to select for the second one here, instead of using rem, we're going to come inside of style, come down here to where we have rem. And instead of selecting rem, we want to select instead m. And inside of the top, right, bottom, and left, we want to do that again. On the top, we want to say 0.5. At the bottom right here, we want to say 0.5. On the right and the left, we want to select 1m for both sides, right? So if you look at both of these buttons, it looks to you right now that they're the exact same thing. And because they almost look identical, right? So where is my case for making use of m's instead of rem? It makes sense when you begin to adjust the value of the font size inside of that link. Let me show you. If you select inside of the first link right here, let's just say you select that to come inside of style, you come down here to where you have, actually it's at the top here, where you have the typography. You want to instead select, let's say H1, heading 1, which is the biggest size. Remember, this is the style and not the tag, right? We talked about that before, right? So let's say we want to select that as our size. So let's select that. And it's big. Now the button is big. But what you notice is that the space inside of that button remained the exact same. To prove the point, let's select this second one right here. And inside of style, instead of selecting, of course, we're going to select the exact same H1 right here. But instead of the sides, the spacing inside of it remaining the same, as you can see right here, the space inside of this increased because the font size has increased. Can you take note right now of the difference between rem and m's when you're styling buttons? You want to always use m's because in this case, it's going to help you to scale up and down your button size based on the font size inside of that button. Well, I just thought to give you a crash course here. It's not very important as it relates to queries and listings, but I mean, you learn a little bit of stuff as you go along, right? So let's delete the one that has the rem value because we don't need that. And let's return this one back. The one with the m value, we want to return that back to paragraph text as the text size. And this should be all right. It's good for us, right? Now, once we're done with that, we want to click on publish. We know that this link is going to link us to the post, the current post inside of that listing. So let's come back to our edit page here. Again, as we did before, we just want to enter a listing grid widget right here. Drag that listing grid widget just below blog right here. Also inside of listing, we want to select blog as our listing of blogs. This should be fine. We want to put the column number as 1, and I've taken the liberty of adding another blog post right here besides the blog post that came with WordPress. If you want to, you can then come inside of style here and adjust the vertical gap for the listing, but that's entirely your choice. For now, I'm just going to leave it as is. I need you to play around with the settings you have here. Let me know what you find. All right. Once we're done with that, you want to click on publish, come to the front end. Let's see how things are looking. I'm going to refresh the page right here. And once the page is refreshed, we can scroll down. We have our listing of blog right here. This is very, very nice. If you want to, just as a last tip before we round off this course, you can click on the edit query button you find up there because that's going to help you to very quickly edit your query. And if you edit the query, you're done with it. You just click on update query, close this out, and you're basically done. You don't have to go to the back end and come to the front end. All you have to do is hover over your listing, click on edit query, and do your business. That's it. This will not be the end of the course. In fact, in the next lesson, we're going to be talking about something even more fancy. In our next lesson, we're going to be talking about filters. We'll talk about how filters can be used to determine what listing items show up. And if you don't understand what filters are, don't worry about it. I'm going to start from the very basics to explain to you just how you can use this to filter out stuff that you have already displayed in the front end using your listing as I just showed you in this course, and you're going to understand every single bit of it. My name is Tobi Salami. This was lesson 6, and until I see you in the next lesson, stay dynamic.